Hello, I'm Brigantia Blackbird of Blackbird's Brew, and today it is time for a little divination demonstration. This is the ultimate guide to tarot spreads. Reveal the answer about every question about work, home, fortune, and love by Liz Dean, who is also the author of The Ultimate Guide to Tarot. Now, the spread I have chosen for us today is called The Heart, for obvious reasons, because the cards are arranged in the shape of a heart. Now, if you've been reading tarot any length at all, you know that you can always count on someone to ask you about their love life, their health, or their material prospects. And more often than not, it usually has something to do with a relationship, probably a relationship that hasn't happened yet and they would like to pursue that, or something's going wrong, or things are right, but they're just looking for a little bit of confirmation. And this is a good spread, I think, that would help provide a little bit of clarity for your querent. Now, there's some interesting notes on this one. The heart has the secondary question, have I met the one? So this is especially if you get the idea that someone is wanting to know if this is the time to invest in that relationship, if it's going to ultimately be worth their while, if they're on a path that's really going to be good for them. This is a good spread to explore that question. So, you go through the usual process, you shuffle, you deal out the cards, all this and that. But it then has a few further notes. It says that if a lot of swords appear in the spread, that it's a relationship based on the mind, and it denotes a strong physical attraction. If you have a lot of wands in the spread, you had some more of a soulful passion, speed and intensity, kind of a hot and fast kind of thing. A lot of cups, it resonates with a deep emotional bond. And if you see pentacles, you see a lot of shared values, slow burn love that lasts, something that you would expect to see in a married couple, really. Some people who are going to be able to go the distance. Now, that doesn't mean that they don't have a strong mental connection or a super strong emotional or fiery, passionate connection, but it does mean that they are building with a fairly solid material, and that's going to take them a bit further than the other qualities in and of themselves. Now, last note on this is that as you're going through and interpreting the card, and then you get down to the outcome card, which is right here, they give you a list of cards that denote kind of a yes, a no, or a neutral, and then they have exceptions. So, and when I did this, and I got to the outcome card, I thought that there was some ambiguity, especially when you take that card in context with the rest of the cards in the reading, and we'll be getting into that very shortly. So I went through the chart of yes, no's, neutrals, and what I discovered is that taken together, I did get a pretty strong picture, but there was still some wiggle room that we will just have to talk about. So, first card, number 1, we have the Magician, and it represents the current situation for the querent. And of course, Major Arcana, that means you have a greater weight placed on this card. Is going to have a greater impact on the cards that surround it in the spread. And also with the Major Arcana, you will notice that the effects of it have longer lasting implications than perhaps the suit cards. So the Magician in general, what it represents is that you have more control in your life than what you currently think or feel or perceive yourself to have. And also to keep in mind that all actions have consequences. Now, I would like to note, consequences does not mean punishment. It does not mean condemnation. It just means result. A plus B equals C. And depending what A and B are comprised of, that will determine how much you enjoy the result of C. So think about the consequences, and also take into account that consequences can be quite far-reaching, and how true that is. Any kind of relationship, especially once it's taken to the physical level, and this is particularly applies to heterosexual couples, is that you could have the possibility of producing children. There is no more long-lasting of a consequences than having produced a child with someone. For the rest of your lives, you're going to have to cooperate with each other in some sense. So that's it. You should be really very careful. Another thing also to think about far-reaching consequences is that this doesn't get talked about a whole lot, but I mean, there are such a thing as STDs, and unfortunately, sometimes things don't always have an easy fix. So it is worth thinking about, do you really want to go there with someone? Do you feel like rolling those dice? Because a lot of people don't, and unfortunately sometimes they suffer the consequences, the rest of their lives even. But 3 keywords to keep in mind with the magician is power, ability, and responsibility. Now, in the context of a love reading, that's really telling me that at this moment, the couple in question have so much within their own purviews. They are not being subjugated to external influences or really internal struggles. This is really about 2 complete people interacting with one another, and they are making active decisions. This implies to me a mental process as much as an emotional process. It's about deciding. So I wouldn't necessarily, from this card, immediately think that we have found ourselves a couple of soulmates, but perhaps we have found people who are compatible, and perhaps that compatibility is the result of nurturing. So let's proceed. Card number 2, we have the 5 of Swords. And this has to do with the other person's feelings, because this reading is really taken from the perspective of the querent. So the person that the querent is in the relationship with. So 5 of Swords, you might also keep in mind that numerologically, I can talk this morning, I promise, 5s tend to be more of an unstable number. But it can also relate to a symbol of protection. For instance, the pentacles that we wear, the 5-pointed star encapsulated in the circle. So that's not necessarily an indication that things are on rocky ground. And of course, as a reminder, this is Swords, so we're talking about a mental and a physical attraction. The 5 of Swords specifically is about giving a thorough consideration of the matter from every angle and aspect. So the querent's partner is really giving things a good think. They're looking about what's going on now, what's happened in the past, what they think is likely to happen in the future. They're looking at the different varieties in which that they and the other person interact and what that means, really. But a part of finding the answers to questions is learning to ask the right questions, because sometimes you can ask a lot of questions, but it wasn't that right question, and so it gave you a misleading result. And so this is about keeping asking those questions, keep exploring, keep finding out, and eventually the right answer will be found. This tells me that the querent's partner is not yet 100% committed to them. Now, cards 3 and 5, which, if you will notice on our chart, are directly across from each other, right here, and they represent aspects of the relationship and how it might be developed. So I really took the 3rd card as meaning what aspects are currently present, and then I saw the 5th card as the probable consequences and results of that development. So 3rd card, we have another major arcana in the Empress. The Empress, of course, also represents the goddess, female divinity in general. Major arcana, so again, think longer-term consequences, greater weight in the here and now. And the Empress tells us that you are faced with a clear answer, but it may not be the one you hoped for. You're in a position to nurture something. It's necessary to give of yourself in order to sustain life, but you need to keep in mind that you are not smothering the unique personality of the person, project, relationship, or situation you find entrusted to your care. I find this very interesting in the context of this reading, because we've already noticed that one person is not yet fully all in, and of course with the Magician we saw that this relationship is the consequence of conscious decisions. It's not people who are just drawn to each other emotionally, or people who had the spark of fire between them and they just could not stay away from each other. And we haven't seen any pentacles yet, so we're not necessarily seeing a relationship that's built on common ground. But we are seeing a relationship built of common choices, and the Empress seems to be saying that you can choose to nurture this or you cannot, but you have to be careful on how you go about it, because just because you think you are being nurturing, you might be more so smothering and causing problems and essentially expecting that person to conform to your own ideas of what they should be, instead of figuring out who they really are and if who they really are is compatible with who you really are. So that's one thing to keep in mind. So now we have the 5th card, which represents the probable development, and we have the Knight of Swords. So Knight, court card. Court cards can represent specific people in the situation. This may or may not literally represent someone, either party in the relationship or someone who's affecting their relationship. But knights also indicate messengers. They are there to deliver something. So this could be taken as delivering a message about how things have developed thus far. And of course, as a sword, it's again a repetition of that idea of mental and physical attraction. So a few notes on the Knight of Swords. It's about training the body and disciplining the mind, master with precision anything that the mind is set to, dedication to a goal taking precedence. Other people's needs and emotions may fall victim to that quest. That's a bit worrying because we don't know what the goal here actually is. If their goal is to work together and to really form this relationship, this could be an okay-ish card, but the idea of needs and emotions being ignored or set aside in pursuit of the goal, that is somewhat concerning. Because a relationship, particularly a romantic relationship, in particular something you intend to end in marriage, it needs to be about the fulfillment of needs and taking care of each other's emotions. I mean, let's face it, it's a tough world out there, and no matter how much nagging that certain people do, the reality is, even if people give lip service to the idea, the truth is, no one really cares about your emotions or your needs or what's good for you, because they're having to think about what's good for them. They have to think about what's good for the people in their lives. You can't worry about the whole world. And you'll notice the people who claim to are some of the biggest liars and hypocrites you will ever come across. So as we are in a world in which, essentially, just because of the human nature and how things work, you can't be expecting a nice, safe cocoon with the rest of the world, but you do need to find that cocoon with a romantic partner. And if that isn't what's happening, then that's a huge problem. And I do wonder if this card indicates a failure to create that cocoon, if there's been a failure of the nurturing that came through the Empress. So we shall see. Now, the fourth card, it indicates what will test them or what will support them. And we have another court card, the King of Cups. Now, kings tend to represent mature, masculine people, perhaps rulers. Sometimes signifies literally being in charge of something. And it can also indicate leadership. Now, our first sign of cups is that it relates to a deep emotional bond. So this is a more encouraging card than really what we've looked through so far. That the King of Cups is a compassionate and caring leader. He cares more about people's happiness than efficiency, love of beautiful things, but frustrated artistic desires can be a distraction. I don't think the last aspect of it is super relevant to this reading, so we'll set it aside. It's encouraging to see that there is a concern about happiness, that it's about perhaps putting each other first, and wanting to create something beautiful, and there being kindness and care involved in all of this. Now, as a test or support, I wonder if perhaps if this is the test, to see if they can go through their mutual intellectual processes to get to a point that is a bit more heart-focused, which a relationship should certainly be a matter of the heart. So I guess this is the big challenge, at least that's certainly how I would interpret it in this context. Now, last, our outcome card, the most likely outcome, and keep in mind, we always retain the power to make different choices. You know, we shouldn't see an outcome card and think like, oh, this is absolutely inevitable. No, it's most probable based upon what has taken place up to this point in time. But with different choices and with different behavioral patterns, people can actually reshape their fate. So, especially if you've had a recent reading that wasn't too favorable, do not think that you are automatically going to be victim to that. You do still retain agency and autonomy. But going on, we have another knight, so a messenger, and this time it is the Knight of Cups. So again, referring to that deep emotional bond. And as a messenger, we know that this knight has something to say. This knight is dreamy and romantic, but also in love with the idea of being in love, but doesn't see anything in black and white, experiences very strong emotions, interesting to be around, flair for the dramatic, can be exhausting, emotions based more on whims than on reality. Interesting outcome for all of this, and you can see why I was looking more so to the yes-no cards to get a little bit better picture of what was going on. But on the whole, it doesn't leave me with the best feeling. It leads me to think that perhaps there has been some projection in this relationship, perhaps on the part of both parties. Maybe no one is really seeing each other clearly. Uh, are you familiar with the expression, can't see the forest for the trees, indicating that someone has overanalyzed something absolutely to death to the point where they can't see the main point of something? They can no longer see what's actually there because they've been so hyper-focused on details that they lost the context of those details. I wonder if perhaps this is part of that. Maybe one or both parties was wanting the idea of a relationship, and they saw someone who was nice and they were getting along with, and they thought, well, maybe this will be all right, and they've been trying to convince themselves that there could be some self-delusion involved in this. And as far as the emotions based more on whims than reality, this really brings me to certain suits of cards that have been missing from this reading. First and foremost, the absence of any pentacles. Without pentacles, where's the common shared values? I mean, there is truth in the idea that opposites attract, but the opposites that stay together are the ones who have differences of temperament, differences of behavior sometimes, but they do have very common core values. And they are able to keep coming back to that, and that keeps drawing that back to them, and their differences are essentially what makes things exciting for them and what keeps the passion alive in the relationship. So I'm disturbed that we have not seen very much common ground. This indicates to me perhaps they aren't really wanting to move in the same direction in life. They may have different goals, different priorities, and the truth is that their path may not necessarily involve them walking forward together. That is certainly the vibe I am getting. Now, when I looked at the yes-no cards, the outcome card was in the yes column, as were four of the other cards. The two no's, of course, were the swords cards. But despite of getting more yeses than nos, the overall tone of this particular reading and seeing how the cards fit together, this really tells me that if it's a question of have I met the one, I think the answer is no. Perhaps, because perhaps, it would be possible for them to still build a successful relationship. There is such a thing as people making a decision that they're together, they want to continue to be together. Perhaps they have children together, or perhaps they bought a house together, and now talk about some serious consequences if you wanted to split that up. But for whatever reason, they're wanting to make a genuine go of it. Probably what the best thing for them to do would be to focus on those pentacle qualities. They might actually have things that are very much in common. They might share values, they might share goals, and perhaps that simply, for whatever reason, has not been effectively communicated yet. So the best thing that this couple could do is really to have an open discussion, not just being in each other's opposite corners, analyzing the other person, but actually talking to each other. Perhaps there has been a communication issue of not being able to be open and honest with that communication. And this isn't too much out of the ordinary because there's so much emotional charge when it comes to serious conversations and relationships, especially if, pardon me. Oh, okay, I'm better now. Not the Rona. But going on, serious conversations can be very much emotionally charged. There can be so much at stake, and if there haven't been any real open conflicts between them before. I mean, I'm not talking about, little bickering that, couples sometimes do when they're just picking on each other more for fun than anything else. But I'm talking about the actual serious areas of disagreement, and they haven't had that practice of getting into the disagreement, that disagreement taking place, and then coming together and rebuilding from there. When you don't have that history, it can make it all the more difficult to actually broach these serious subjects, because the longer it goes, probably the more scared you are. And then you might think that, oh, if we really do go here, that could be the end of everything, and I don't know if I'm emotionally ready for this. Because you will note there were just as many cups in this reading as there were swords. So there is this balance between the two of them. And as far as the major arcana goes, both of those were sending the message of, you have power, this is very much within your hands. And that tells me you can make it work, but not on your current track. You're going to have to change your approach. You're going to have to do something different. So that is my take on it. Let me know if you looked at those cards, if you saw something different, or if you were the one who was interpreting the cards for this particular couple, if you had any particular advice for them about how to sort things out, or if you want to make the case of, well, you know, this doesn't really seem like a good fit. Why don't you go your separate ways and try again with someone else? Whatever the case may be, let me know in the comments below. I will see you in another video. Bye.